because you know what to study. So the topic that we'll cover include these things, okay? From syntax, so everything after the second quiz, okay? So we have syntax, and you need to know these topics: embedded and coordinated structures. Remember the coordinate structures, you have conjunctions that join two or more things, right? And they should stand in the same level, right? So they should stand at about the same level. Like if you join two noun phrases, so it would be like this: noun phrase 1, noun phrase 2, and the conjunction here. Could be or and, whatever, right? So you should have two or more things that are on the same level, and they are joined by conjunctions, okay? But for the embedded part, you have what we call the CP, remember? CP, which consists of C and S, remember? The complementizer phrase, which consists of the complementizer, words like that, if, or whether, and then another S, which is smaller, right? Smaller clause, like that. So remember these two structures. And ambiguity, remember when we talked about ambiguity, we talked about the fact that one sentence could be interpreted in two ways, depending on the structure, right? And it's usually the prepositional phrase that has the problem, whether it could go with the noun phrase or the verb phrase. Remember, the nominal modifier or verbal modifier, right? And we'll look at some examples today. And then finally, remember the silent syntax. We look at some constructions where you don't see the pronouns, so we call it pro, which means that they are there, but we don't really see it or we don't really hear it. So as in, I hope to go, so you have to go as another clause, a small clause in that, and the subject is the same as I expect to go, I hope to go, and so on. So that's the silent pro. And the trace is a result of WH movement, right? For example, I wonder who to invite. It comes from I wonder I should invite who, like that, and so on. So we'll look at this today. So that's the syntax part. The pragmatic part, you need to know dexes, right? So dexes includes expressions that include the expressions that change their reference, right? The reference will be different depending on the time, depending on the person who says those utterances, okay? Things like here or there, yesterday or today. The reference as to the date, the place will change depending on when they are said. Presupposition, things that the speaker assumes to be true before saying it, and without having to say it explicitly. Speech act, remember there is direct and indirect speech act, right? So the direct speech act is where the form matches the function. For example, you use questions just to get information, so that's direct. But there are times when the function doesn't match the form. Like you use the question to make a statement, who cares, like that, right? And thematic roles, you should know that patient or agent, and so on. And conversational maxims, 4 maxims, remember? Manner, quantity, quality, and relevance. Maxims are important because they could imply subtle meanings, right? And finally, we studied diachronic linguistics or historical linguistics. You should know the language family of English, Indo-European, in the West Germanic subfamily, right? And some assumptions in language change. For example, language changes all the time, and you cannot stop language from changing. Even though you might not see language change clearly in your everyday life, language is constantly changing. Because when we talk about changes, like you remember the great vowel shift, that happened over a period of 300 or 400 years. So when we look back, it's a significant change when one vowel is moved one level, right? From A to E, for example, that's a huge change. You cannot do that overnight, right? Because people would misunderstand the word. If faith sound like feet, then people are not going to understand what you're saying. But when we talk about the great vowel shift, that's a period of 300 or 400 years. So when we look back, it's a huge change. But as it happens, it's just like continuously changed bit by bit. So people would not recognize it as much when they went around saying the raised vowels. And then remember the characteristic of Old English, that it is highly inflected. You have a lot of endings for nouns and verbs, and you know the cases, right? Nominative, accusative, genitive, and dative. These are important. And then some linguistic changes like pejoration, amelioration, the meaning gets worse, the meaning gets better, like that over time. So those are the things that we'll focus on for the final, okay? And I have, on the same handout, I have example questions that you could find on the final exam, okay? So if we start in this order, the order of the topics here, we will start with syntax first, okay? For syntax, you should be able to draw 2 trees for one sentence in the case of ambiguous sentences, okay? So, for example, this one, the man put the book in the front, the man put the book in the box on the table. So what are the 2 meanings? So first you have to think about the 2 possible interpretations, okay? So the verb is here clearly, right? Put, right? And the book is the object, NP. Now what's interesting is that the modifier of the book, right? In the box. So let's see how I should explain this. So in the box, we know that it's a modifier of the book. Itself is a prepositional phrase, right? In the box is a prepositional phrase, and the book in the box, right? And then on the table is another prepositional phrase. But it can function as a modifier of box on the table. That's one interpretation, right? He put the book in the box on the table. So the box is here, he put the book in the box which is on the table. Okay, so that's the first interpretation. The second interpretation is the man put the book in the box here. The box could be on the floor. And then the man put the book in that box on the table. The box is not on the table. So in that case, put on the table modifies put, right? Put where? Put on the table, not the box on the table. So in conclusion, it's the preposition phrase, the last prepositional phrase that's problematic, right? It could work as a modifier of the box on the table, or a modifier of put the book in the box on the table, right? Whereas in this, I'm sorry, it's like the book and the box and the table. There are too many V's. The box may or may not be on the table already. Okay, so in the first one, let's see that it's the box that's on the table. Okay, so the meaning is in the box, which is, okay, so in this case it's clear that the box is on the table. Which is on the table? So that's meaning 1, okay? Meaning 2 is the book in the box was put on the table. The book, right? It's not the box in the books. The book in the box was put on the table. In this case, the box itself is not on the table. Okay, clear. So the tree for number 1 in the box, which is on the table. In this case, we have to hang on the table as part of box, as a modifier of box. Okay, so it would look like for meaning 1, right? So S like this, going to NP and VP. So we have the man here. On the exam, please write this out fully as determiner and the noun, okay? And then we have V put, and then NP, so this is the book. So with determiner, I'm sorry, and the noun, right? And in this case, let's see, in the box, PP, P in the box, right? And it's the box that's on the table, so it will modify the word box. Okay, so we have PP, P on the table like that. So in this case, the box is already on the table, and he put the book in that box, which is on the table. So we know that it's the box that's on the table because we see the prepositional phrase here as part of the box, which means that the box is already on the table, not put on the table. Okay? So that's the first one. The second one is where we put the book in the box on the table. So are you done with this? So I can do the second one. So the second one would be just a little bit different, right? So we have, I'll just do the VP to save time, okay? So the VP would consist of the V put and then NP. So we have determiner the N book, right? And then PP, P in the box. And then since it modifies the VP, right, the prepositional phrase on the table will be here. P on and then NP, the table. So in this case, the box itself is not on the table, presumably, okay? And we put the book in that box and we put it on the table. Maybe the box is not on the table either. Okay? So this is what makes a problem, or what makes it possible to have two interpretations. So I will have an ambiguous sentence of this same nature, of this similar nature for you on the final. So make sure that you are able to interpret the meanings, the two different meanings, and also be able to match the meaning and the tree, the structure, right? Because the structure tells us what meaning it has. So in this case, it's put on the table, not the box that's already on the table. Okay. Let's look at the next question, which is number 2. Can you draw a tree for number 2? The tourists wonder which animals in the zoo they will see. When you see this, you have to know that it's a case of what we call an embedded sentence, right? And you have this part as the embedded part, right? Which animals in the zoo they will see. So you must have 2 different S's, right? 2 different sentences. One is within the bigger one, okay? So you need, in this case, a CP. Whenever you have an embedded clause, you need a CP. And what's also interesting is that you see the word which animal, or actually it's which animals in the zoo, right? Because that whole chunk is what has been moved from another position, right? From the previous position, which is see something, right? See this. Like the tourists wonder, they will see which animals in the zoo, like that, okay? So the whole chunk has been moved from there, okay? So when you have a moved element, you need a trace, remember, a T, right? Not a pro. A pro is a pronoun, but here is a moved element, the WH word. So in this case, we should have both the CP and also the moved element, okay? So I'll show you how to write this. So you just write the main clause first, okay? So the main clause is the tourist wonder, right? So this is the tourist, and then wonder is here. So that's the main clause. And now the other part is what we call the embedded part, or the subordinate clause, and it should be in the form of a CP because you have the word, right? So for the CP, we have a C and an S. In this case, we don't have a complementizer if, whether, or that. We don't have that here. So we'll just leave it blank for now. The S will consist of just an NP and a VP in the same way that we usually do. The NP, so the next thing is to figure out the NP. The NP should not be which animal, right? It should be the subject of the whole clause here before moving. Before the movement happened. So it should be they, right? They, here is a pronoun. And then the VP, we have auxiliary, which is will, and then V, see. So that's that's like the most part of it, right? Now, what's left is to indicate the subject of see. See what, right? So see which animals in the zoo. That is what we call a noun phrase, isn't it? Right? So it's a noun phrase. We have determiner which, right? And then in animals, and then PP, like in the zoo, like this. Let me. Right? The whole thing is a noun phrase. Which animals in the zoo, right? The whole thing is a noun phrase with the word which as the determiner, right? Which is the determiner because it determines noun, like which person did you see? The red one, the tall one, the short one. So which is a determiner for sure, right? And then animal is the head noun, and in the zoo is the prepositional phrase, okay? So the whole thing though, not just a word, the whole thing is moved, leaving a trace. You see this? It's moved from that position to the position before C, okay? We don't have C as the landing site. Remember, because C is not a CP, right? C is the level of word. So it should be one word, like is or will or whatever, right? But this should be a phrase type. So it should not be in the C position, okay? if you have a question like which person, this is different, okay? Will you see? In this case, you have two things that moved. You will see which person. So will would be in the C position because it's a word, okay? So it could be in the C position. But which person will be in this branch that I will not talk about as to the name, but it's the branch before the C. Okay. If you go on in syntax, then you will know what this is called. Okay. So when you have a WH movement, it always leaves a trace. A trace is like a position there that we don't see, but it's there. Okay. So WH movement, always a trace. And then it usually moves to the position before the C. Okay? Whereas verbs in questions like will move again to the other position, which is a C. Okay? So this one is clear? Okay. Now, number 3, we can move on to number 3. I recommend you to walk a middle path between extreme indulgence and self-deprivation. Indulgent is like you don't stop doing something, you don't stop eating, you don't stop enjoying. So that's indulgent is having something to the extreme, to whatever you want. And self-deprivation is like to deprive is to get rid of, right? So he suggests that we should walk a middle way between the two extremes, okay? When you see this sentence, you should see not a pro, but you should see a small clause, because whenever you see a verb, there is a clause. We count a clause by counting the most important word, which is a verb. So we have 2 verbs here, including recommend and to walk. So at least you must have 2 clauses. One is bigger than another, right? Because it's an embedded case. This one is a small clause. The other one, recommend, is the main clause. So we have a CP again because it's an embedded case. So like this, NP and VP. I is here, pronoun. And recommend is here, right? Before you go on, you have to stop here, and then because don't just write you as an NP here, because it's a subject of another clause. So start off a new clause right here, okay? Let me use another color. So CP, C and S, okay? So S would have NP and VP the same way, and then U would be here, pronoun you. And then to walk is the verb of that clause, which has no tense, okay, because it's an infinitive. And then finally we have the NP, determiner A, and then adjective phrase, middle, which goes to adjective, middle, and then part is the noun, like this. So adjective phrase and adjective middle, to write it out in full, because it could be a very middle part, a small middle part, whatever, okay? Extremely middle part like that, or precisely middle part, because you could have an adverb in here, adverb of degree. And then what's the rest? Between indulgence and self-preservation. So we have a prepositional phrase here, and then let's see, between extreme indulgence and self-deprivation, right? So you have P, in this case you have a P, okay, between, and then NP, okay? But notice that NP consists of two NPs, right? So you have a conjoined structure, right? So you have like this, NP1, and then conjunction NP2, okay? And then can you go on from here? NP1 is extreme self-indulgence, right? So we have adjective phrase and adjective. So we have extreme and then N indulgence like this. And then NP2 is self-deprivation. So here's N, like that. So I think what's interesting is the fact that it's a conjoined expression. So we have a conjunction here, and on both sides of the conjunction we have NP1 and NP2, like that. Okay. But it's also, but I will let that go now. But it's also interesting that this is also an ambiguous case, right? Because extreme could be only modifying indulgence, or it could also modify extreme self-deprivation. In this case, I only have it as modifying indulgence, but it's also ambiguous in that case. But I will let that go for this one. Okay. So syntax is not difficult, because as long as you can parse, as long as you can recognize different units, different groups of things, noun phrases, verb phrases, and different maybe clauses here, you should be able to do that. There's no description, or there's no memorization for syntax. Okay, so if you are good at syntax, you should be able to score this well. Okay, so that's the syntax part. And so you should be able to do ambiguity, you should be able to do movement, and you should be able to do small clauses. Okay? And to move to the next part, we have the pragmatics. So pragmatic is the study of meaning, right? And we'll have different topics under pragmatics on the exam, one of which is whether it's direct or indirect speech act. Okay? Remember, direct is where the form matches the function or the meaning, and indirect is where the form doesn't match the function or the meaning. So I will have different statements, and you will tell me on the exam whether they are direct or not direct. So, and what may be the intended effects on the listener, right? What may be the intended meaning. And we know the intended meaning is called the illocutionary force, right? And the locutionary is the statement, the literal meaning of the thing. But the illocutionary is the intended meaning, okay? So, as in number A, a sign on a fence reads, "Parking here prohibits rubbish collection." Parking here prohibits rubbish collection. Is that direct or indirect? And if it's indirect, what's the intended meaning? Suppose that you drive a car and you want to park there, and you just see the sign here. It says, "Parking here prohibits rubbish collection." So the locutionary meaning, the literal meaning is, parking here will prohibit rubbish collection. So that's the locutionary meaning, right? But the illocutionary meaning that they want to tell you based on the sign or based on this expression is, "Do not park here," right? Because parking here prohibits rubbish collection. So in this case, the illocutionary is different from the locutionary meaning. So in this case, it's indirect speech act. And the meaning, the intended meaning, or the illocutionary is "Do not park here," right? It doesn't say that directly. it just say that parking here will make a problem, but it doesn't say do not park here. So it's indirect, and we're supposed to know that, okay? And one part of understanding language is you have to recognize the intended meaning. The second one, a warning on a can reads, do not incinerate. Incinerate is to throw into fire. Throw into a fire or burn. Do not burn it, right? Is this clear? Is this direct? Do not do X and Y. So it's imperative, right? So this is direct. We don't have to interpret. We don't have to think about the intended meaning, okay? If it says, on the other hand, it will explode on fire, right? That way you can interpret as indirect. Okay? Let's see. A train conductor points to a no smoking sign. So this is on a train. So a train conductor, a person who just check whether you have the ticket or not, point to the sign on the train that says no smoking, and he says to you, and you are smoking, do you see that sign? Okay, do you see that sign? By itself, do you see that sign is a question, and the literal meaning or the locutionary meaning is whether or not you see the signs, right? You can answer, yes, I see the sign, or no, I didn't see the sign, right? But that's not the intended meaning, of course. So this is indirect, an indirect speech act, because the question is not a question. It's just to tell you, do not smoke, right? Even, are you stupid not to observe the sign, like that? Finally, we have this statement. Your friend who was absent in the previous class shows up for class this time and says to you, did you take notes during the last class? More likely, when he says this question, he wants to borrow your notes, right? So in this case, it's more like an indirect speech act, because it means that can you, or please lend me your notes, your class notes, like that. To lend is to give to, right? To borrow is to get from. So that's the direct and indirect speech acts, okay? So as long as the form matches the meaning and the intended meaning is the same as the form, then we have the direct speech act. The next part is for you to recognize deictic and non-deictic expressions. So remember, deictic expressions are expressions whose reference change every time depending on who says it, where you say it, and so on. So if it doesn't change, if the reference stays the same, it's not a deictic expression. Like number 5, how do you get to the Fifth Avenue from here? So if somebody, asks you, a stranger asks you on the street, how do you get to Chonhodero? Like that, okay? From here. Is you here a deictic expression or not? Does the reference change or not, depending on the hearer or not? Is you in this case meaning you, meaning the listener? The speaker asks the listener, meaning the listener or not? Or meaning, how does one get to the Fifth Street? How does anyone get to the Fifth Street? More likely, this is a general reference, right? Which means anyone. How does one get to the Fifth Avenue from here? So it's non deictic in this case because the reference doesn't change, right? The referent doesn't change. And the listener is not likely a person who wants to go to the Fifth Avenue, right? It's just like if I see you here and I ask you, how do you go to E-Mart from here? It's not like the listener who will go to E-Mart. So it's anyone, how does anyone go to E-Mart like that? So it's non-deictic because the referent doesn't change. What about number 2? You have to be 21 to be allowed to buy a gun. Does the referent change or not? Depending on who reads it or not? No? Because if I read it, I'm a little bit over 21, right? A little bit over 21. So that reference only refers to me. But if you read it, some of you are not 21 yet. So it will be a different reference. So for this one, it's deictic, right? Because it represents different persons, right? If I read it, then yes, I'm over 21, right? A little bit, just a little bit. But for you guys, no, right? So the referent is not the same, right? Depending on who reads it, who you refers to. So in this case, it's deictic, okay? Number 3, there is a mailbox across the street from the drugstore. Across the street, in this case, does the meaning, does the referent change or not? The center point is from the drugstore, right? So you have the drugstore as the reference point. So across the street from that drugstore is always the same because you have the drugstore as the landing site, as the landmark. So whatever it is, across the street from the drugstore, that's where it is, okay? That's where the mailbox is, right? So you cannot like have confusion as to where the mailbox is because it takes the drugstore as the reference point and the mailbox will not change where it is, right? So in this case, it's non-deictic because the place of the mailbox will not change now that we have the drugstore as the reference point, as the landmark point, okay? It's always there. But if you say there's a mailbox across the street from here, the reference always changes, right? Because depending on where here is, right? So depending on where you say this, if it's here on this side, the mailbox will be on the other side. But if here means this side, the mailbox will be on the other side. So the referent, the place of the mailbox always changes. So it's deictic in this case. And this is similar to last one, which is number F. There's a mailbox across the street, right? So depending on where you are, where the speaker is, right? So it's also deictic. So if the referent changes, then it's deictic. Number 4, I'm sorry, I skipped number 3. So that's the deictic part, okay? And I may have a question on presuppositions. Presuppositions are, let's see, assumptions that people have without having to say those assumptions explicitly. So, as in this case, it was John who let the dog out, okay? There could be many presuppositions, but I may ask you for just one. So, when you say, or when someone says, it was John who let the dog out, so we know that the dog is already out, right? So one of the presupposition is the dog is already out. Okay? The dog is already out. So that's one of the presupposition. without the speaker having to say that the dog is already out. But as soon as you say this, then we know that the dog is already out. Or another possible presupposition is someone let the dog out. Someone let it out. It may or may not be John, but someone, which may be John or someone else, okay? Remember, a particularly interesting characteristic of a presupposition is you can deny the sentence and the presupposition is still there. If you say it wasn't John who let the dog out, the dog is already out still. Or it wasn't John but Mary, but someone must have let the dog out, like that. So a presupposition survives the cancellation or the denial, okay? So that's an example. So finally, we can talk about conversation maxim. Remember, there are 4 maxims: manner, quantity, quality, and relevance, right? So people usually follow those maxims in conversation, but they can also what we call flout. To flout the maxim is to violate the maxim. In order so fond is to like, right? Jotta, right? Instead of saranghara, jotta, right? Jotta. So in this case, do you think that B loves him or her or not? This is to flout the maxim, right? So because the maxim says that if you love him, just say it, right? Clearly is the maxim of manner. Just say it in the relevant manner. This is relevant in the still on the topic of love or like. So that's that maxim is taken care of. Quality, we assume that he's telling the truth, okay, the truth. But quantity, the problem of quantity here, because there is a quantity. So if they want this information, love is kind of a lot of quality of liking, right? High quality of liking. So if you love him, just say, if you want to observe the maxim of quantity, you have to say, I love you, or I love you a lot, like that. But here, he intentionally says that this is the degree, right? The degree is less than a lot of love. So he wants to imply that, he or she wants to imply that I don't love you to that degree. I just like you, like that. So the implied meaning is I don't love you without having to say it. So he or she intentionally flouts the maxim of quantity, okay? Because he says perhaps less than what's required in this case in order to convey that meaning, okay? So I will give you different situations and you will tell me whether the speaker flouts the maxim or not, and if flouting, which maxim is being flouted and what's the illocutionary meaning, what's the implied meaning, okay? So if you have this exchange between Jack and Jill, and Jack says, Katie is cooking dinner tonight, and Jill says, we better stock up on cup noodles. What does that mean, right? You see that possibly it's not a direct meaning, right? So in this case, what is it? Jill flouts the maxim, right? And which maxim is being flouted here? Quantity, quality, manner, or relevance? You could say either manner or relevance, okay? So let's say manner or relevance. Sometimes it's not clear, so you can have two. In this case, the manner says that you have to say it clearly, right? But it's not clear what she means here. Or relevance, meaning what's the relevance for this statement, we better stock up on noodles, right? So it's not highly relevant, but we can still assume that there's some connection to it. So the implicature might be that the meaning, implicature is the implied meaning. The meaning might be that Jill thinks that Katie's cooking is not good. Her cooking skills suck, like that, okay? So Katie's cooking skill or Katie's food, like that, suck. So that's why we have to stock up on cup noodles. And you know that cup noodles, ramen, right? Is something that you wouldn't resort to, something that you wouldn't turn to unless you don't have other choices, other options. So this must be bad to the degree that you have to resort to cup noodles, right? Number B, C, D, and E are the same. What are you reading? Jack says. Jill says, a book. Do you think Jill is flouting a maxim? Yes, right? And this is a maxim, clearly a maxim of quantity. Right? Quantity because, I mean, it's less information than what is needed, right? Jack presumably knows or sees. Jack sees that Jill is reading a book, right? But a book about what, right? So Jill gives less information than required. He should have said a book about history or something like that. So it's quantity, okay? And perhaps the meaning is it's not your business, okay? It's not your business, meaning you don't need to know what I'm reading. It's a secret or something like that. It's none of your business to know what I'm reading, like that, okay? Number C is like number A, okay? Similar to number A. Are we going to eat soon? I'm so hungry. And Jill says, in a minute, I just have to fry the liver. And Jack says, well, I've just lost my appetite, right? So this must mean that Jill's skill of cooking or this particular dish, fried liver, sucks, right? So yes, and it's the same maxim of manner or relevance that's being flouted here. And this dish, fried liver, or even Jill's cooking, depending on how you interpret it. Fried liver or Jill's cooking sucks. Okay. What is suck in Korean? Bad. 나쁘다? Like that. I know 친기다. 친기다? Cool, right? The opposite of suck. This is cool. 친기다? How do you say cool in Korean? 쩐나? 쩐나? 시기다? Do you have that? I'll get back to you. Huh? How do you say? Whatever that is. I don't know. But the good news is I'll spend this winter studying Korean here at Hanyang from 9 to 2, just like international students coming to study Korean here. So I'll be in my Korean class, like having conversations. 뭐 했어요? 영화를 보았어요? Like that. Oh God. When you teach language and you have to become a language student yourself, you'll feel this. Let's look at number D. What time is it? Well, the morning news has just ended, right? So Jack asks the time and Jill doesn't say explicitly what time it is, right? So this is the maxim of manner that is being violated or flouted here. And the meaning is, I don't know, depending on what morning news, what time the morning news ended in that particular situation. Perhaps if it usually ends at 9, so it's 9 a.m. like that. If it usually ends at 8, so it's 8 a.m. like that. So in that context, Jill is or Jack is supposed to know what time it is, right? Because the morning news should come on TV and should end on TV at about the same time every day. So she uses that as the way to tell the time, so to imply the meaning, because it's not clear as to what time it is. Okay. Number E, when your mom asks you, did you study all day long? And you say, yes, I have been studying until now, when in fact that person watched TV all day. So this is not flouting the maxim, right? This is not flouting the maxim in order to convey any implied information, but this is just simply a lie, right? So this is not flouting the maxim. Because there's no implied meaning that he wants to convey. He wants the mother to believe that particular statement. So there's no implied meaning there. So it's not flouting the maxim in order to imply a message, but it's in order for the mother to believe that truly, right? So this is not flouting, an exception to not flouting the maxim and not following the maxim either, okay? Because to follow the maxim, you have to tell the truth, right? The maxim of quality says that we have to say what is true. But here is not true, it's the opposite, right? So it's not flouting the maxim to convey another information, but just to lie, okay? This is violating the maxim, but not to convey any information. I will skip number 5 because we have a limited time, so let's finish the history off first because that one is harder. And I will send out the answers by email, okay? So for number 5. So for number 5, I underlined some expressions and you have to tell, to label the thematic role of each expression. Like, he has been earning money through his labor at Baskin-Robbins, so you can visit him there. So he should be the agent, right? S. Kyung-wan should be the agent, and so on. Okay? And you call that beta boy, right? Beta boy. Baskin Robbins. Let's see. What do we have here? This is very recent. This is like last time, right? This is the change of pronunciation, right? Remember the change of pronunciations of all words that have long vowels in early modern English. So when we have the word weave, the word chill, mate, whose, from Old English to Middle English, these words are pronounced like weave, E is E, E is E still. So you have chilled instead of child, mete or whose instead of other things. Now, nowadays, we pronounce it as wife, I, child, I, meat, E, and house, ow, right? The reason for that is what we call the GVS. Remember, the GVS stands for the great vowel shift, right? Oh, not the great vowel shift, which this process raises all long vowels one step higher. And for high vowels, they become diphthongs. Remember? E becomes I, U becomes ow, like that. And again, this doesn't happen overnight. It's not like, oh, today we pronounce it as weave. Tomorrow, let's say wife. Not like that. But they shift little by little without people perceiving it. Okay? And in terms of spelling, we usually have EE to symbolize the sound E, right? Meat instead of mate. Okay? I don't remember we studied number 2, so let's skip. Epenthesis is the addition of a sound. Metathesis is the switching of the sound. We didn't study that, so cross. But we did study number 3, where we have semantic changes. Remember, when a word becomes more general, like hoon or hound, which refers to any dog in Old English, but nowadays only refers to a specific type of dog, we call that generalization, right? When it goes from more specific to more general. Okay? Yes? Oh, the opposite, right? So what's the opposite? What's the opposite? I'm sorry. What's the opposite? Narrowing, right? I think it's called narrowing. I'm sorry. Today I had a 3-hour class in the morning. So there's generalization and narrowing of the meaning, right? Or specification or specialization, along those lines. One of those things. The formal term is like one of those things. But what's important is you know how the meaning changes, right? Narrowing or specification meaning become more specific, right? Or specialization instead of generalization, which is the opposite trend. But the second one, holiday, is that example where you have generalization, which refers to used to refer to generalization, which only refers to a holy holiday, is holy, a sacred day, right? But nowadays we refer to any day where you don't have to work, you don't have to go to class like that. So this is generalization from more specific to more general meaning. Okay? So finally, you must understand how cases work. Okay? And you know that in Old English, we have a lot of cases. You should know the functions of those cases. Nominative, you know, is the subject or after be verb. Accusative, direct object, right? Accusative, direct object. Genitive, possessive, and after of, right? Let's say 10 of the people, some of them, right? So some of them. So here, or some of the people. Here, the part after of, which should be in the possessive, genitive case. Not some, okay, not the word some, but the word after of. Some of them, or some of the men, like that. So the word men or the word them should be in the genitive case. The reason is, in Old English, we didn't have a lot of prepositions including of. So we have to use the case ending instead. Because of here is like, of is more or less a possessive meaning, right? A car of me, a part of me, like that. So of here makes sense for the genitive case. And finally, the dative case is for indirect object or for object of any preposition. Not of, but not of. Other prepositions, Old English has on and not in, I think. Only on and at, they have at as well. Okay? So I will give you a chart like this, which consists of many cases, and you see two different numbers, right? Singular and plural. And you see give, sorrow, daughter. So three different words that we'll be using. So, and you have to select from these different cases there to fill in different sentences. So if I have the Lord gave that gift to his daughter, what case should gift be in and daughter be in? Gift here functions as the DO, direct object, right? So it's the direct object, whereas to his daughter is the indirect object. Now you can select the right word, the right case. So for gift, we would have to select accusative, right? Singular. So it has to be giefe, like that, right? Giefe. And for daughter, in the dative case, so it should be dater, like this. Okay, from this side, from this. So it's dative. So you select it from dative. So you need to know what it does, what a particular noun does in that particular sentence. The gifts lessen the sorrows of the daughter. Here, the gift is the nominative case and nominative plural as well. So it has to be giefa, like that. And then sorrows is the direct object of lessen. Lessen what? So we have the plural form, accusative. So it's sor, sorga, right? From the table there. So it's sorga this. And of the daughter, here is the possessive case. So we have singular genitive. So it is daughter, right? So it's this one, right? you see that it's different, right? Sorrow is in one case and daughter is in another case, okay, because it's after of. Not the noun before of, okay? The noun before of has the case from the verb. Number 4.3, the safe antidote. What is that? Hatokje. Again, sorrow is employment. Sorrow here is the object of a preposition against. So, and it's singular as well. So we would have to select the dative case, which is sorge, like that. Okay? So this should be fine. You don't need to memorize anything as long as you know how the noun phrases or the functions of noun phrases here. So we end this class on time. So your final exam should look more or less like this, and if you're prepared, then you should not have